Pessoal, estamos começando mais um webinar internacional sobre as nossas teses aqui da Hearst. E hoje nós vamos falar sobre um tema muito na atualidade, que é inteligência artificial. Nós temos um produto, um veículo específico e uma grande parceria com a Our Crowd. E nesse momento nós temos o prazer de ter um convidado da Our Crowd. Então, agora eu apresento a vocês o head de fundos da Our Crowd, o Alan.
Hi, pleasure to be here. Hey, Gabriel, thanks for the introduction. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
And hi, everyone.
So, we're very excited to dive into Our Crowd's pioneering work at AI and their strategic partnership with NVIDIA. So this session is for our Hearst investors, and we'll cover portfolio highlights, investment strategies, recent updates, and address key investors' concerns like fund timelines. So let's kick things off with the big picture. Or can you provide an overview of Our Crowd, its mission, history, and global positioning?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So before we dive into the AI world and the AI fund from Our Crowd, maybe let's take a step back and talk about Our Crowd as a whole. So Our Crowd is a global investment platform established 13 years ago. And the vision was and still is to democratize the access to venture investing and other investments in the private markets. If you think about it conceptually, we started from the smallest subset within private market, which is to offer investors, accredited investors around the globe, the opportunity to invest in a single startup. Back then, it was pretty innovative. And venture was a very, very close community. Still is, by the way, but obviously became a bit more sophisticated along the years. And there was a very strong need back then, and still is, to get access to some of those technology companies and startup that we're seeing today. And I think that trend has just accelerated in the past decade as technology, software, and AI started to kind of eat the traditional world that we know. So a few words about Our Crowd. Today, we manage a pretty robust business of $2.3 billion of AUM. We have invested in around 480 direct portfolio companies. So we see a lot of companies from different sectors and different stages. In 2015, we also started establishing our own funds and investing in other funds. So to date, we established and invested in 58 funds, and we are in partnership with additional 7 incubators in Israel. All in all, to date, we had 68 exits, and we have 240,000 registered investors to our platform. They're coming from 195 countries. So that's pretty much a very global business by now. And that's just a nutshell about Our Crowd and who we are.
Great. What amazing history and background from Our Crowd. Since we started talking about Our Crowd, can you give us more details about Our Crowd and AI?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So maybe a bit about myself. Before I joined Our Crowd, I spent 5 years at Silicon Valley Bank supporting and financing startup in different sectors and industries and stages. And AI for the people like that are in the ecosystem, it's not something new. Like we invested in AI companies 2016, 2017, 2018. And pretty much from that moment, every second company became an AI company. But the major tectonic shift happened when those LLM, those large language models, like ChatGPT and Anthropic, which we invested in, and I will expand later, obviously. So that's kind of what brought AI to the massive crowd. So everyone has it, everyone can use it. And that's kind of marked the tectonic shift of AI, because AI, again, was here before those LLM. But I think the LLM ignite kind of another race to who is getting the best AI tool, the best infrastructure, and because we're seeing the amount of efficiencies that AI can drive. So I think that's kind of what sparked the internal discussion here at our crowd. And again, we invested in AI companies before, but we said, okay, something is going on here. There is a tectonic shift in this market, and maybe we should establish a dedicated fund for AI companies that will focus on the four main kind of layers of AI, which I can obviously expand later on. So that's kind of the thought process behind why we wanted to establish that fund and why we did it a year and a half ago.
Great, Or. Could you give us some colors about more details of what you see in the AI world and what is changing our life right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we want to speak about kind of the AI, I think we need to first explain the four main kind of layers that the investor sees, and this is kind of the separation that investors do when they talk about AI, because there is kind of different levels of AI and different verticals. So hold on just a second. I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay. So basically, if you want to understand generative AI, you need to kind of understand those four-layer approach. At the basic of that is the infrastructure layer. And we're basically talking about chips here. And if you look on that and you kind of start to understand that everything is built on that infrastructure, on those chips, you kind of understand why NVIDIA took such a big market share in the past few years. It's because their chip are the fastest, and you can train AI model, and they are the best one to train AI models. Obviously, we have other players in that area, AMD. Most of them are public companies. But they are kind of the infrastructure layer that kind of ignites all of that, because you need to process a lot of computing power. And for that, you need to have the most advanced chips out there. And that's kind of what NVIDIA is doing. By the way, they're doing it. They didn't start yesterday, obviously. They're doing it for the past 20 years. So Jensen Huang, the founder and CEO, kind of envisioned that trend. And now he's just capturing all that market share to himself. And that's kind of the infrastructure layer, mostly about chips. Obviously, when there is such a big market for chip, that starts another sub-markets for that chip. For example, we at our crowd invested in a company that what it does is to cool those chips. Because what happened, those chips are working relentlessly, and they get hit, and they get heated. And basically, so there is another kind of category and sub-market of startups and companies that are trying to cool those chips so they can keep using them. So there is a lot of kind of sub-markets around the infrastructure about maintaining, optimization of that infrastructure. But that's kind of the first layer, the infrastructure layer. Then on top of that, we started seeing, and that's what I talked about just now, about all of those LLM, those large language models that we see. We have Gemini from Google. We have we have ChatGPT from OpenAI. We have Claude from Anthropic, and we also have an Israeli one, AI21 Labs, that also generated an LLM for their own. And this is what it called the foundation model. Basically, what it does, it takes a lot of data, a lot of text data. That's what LLM does. And basically use it to self-supervised learning. Basically, he learns that text and he tries to guess what will be the remainder of that text. That's pretty much what ChatGPT and Gemini and the likes are doing. Obviously, they have a lot of computing power, so they can process a lot of information. And that's how they're so efficient and productive to work with. So that's kind of the layer on top of the infrastructure. Google, Meta with its Llama software, all of them are using the chips of NVIDIA or AMD. We have another company that does kind of inference chips at the edge called Halo. It's an Israeli one. And we have kind of others on the infrastructure layer. So it's not just the big names that we all know. So on top of those LLM, there is kind of the service layer. And the service layer is, again, on top of those LLM, and they are powered by those LLM. And basically, they want to optimize the output of those off-the-shelf LLM, the Claude of the world, the ChatGPT of the world, to specific use case. So they're not just working on one application, they can work on multiple applications, but they are their expertise is in one angle. For example, we have a company that does AI agents. So that AI agent can work on top of other software. It can work on top of a Salesforce, for example, which is in a CRM application, and it can extract information, process information from that application, but they can also do it in other applications in the organization. So that's why it's called the service layer. So that's kind of the third layer. And the fourth layer is the application layer. The application layer, so for all of you who's not aware what application means, for example, a CRM application like Salesforce, that's an example for an application. And they are doing things that are more kind of specific. They can tackle different marketing, coding. For example, we invested in Tab9. Tab9 is an AI company that helps developers to complete their code. They have access to a lot of code around the world, and they train the model on that code. And now they can help developers complete that code so they don't have to write it for themselves. So that's kind of the application layer. Obviously, the risk reward from an investment lens is obviously higher on the infrastructure layer. So there is much risk if you want to start design and build a chip. But obviously the potential reward is much higher, but the access to that field is, again, very hard. You need high expertise, you need high capex, you need to invest a lot of capital, and it goes on until the application layer. So right now we're seeing like a boom on the application layer because basically if you have an LLM, you can start building your own app with not much resource today. We have now like a new wave of company. It's called vibe coding, that you can literally speak to that web application, and they will do all the coding, all the QA, and kind of everything. Kind of makes the developers even redundant. So that's kind of the 4 layers that we see, and kind of the different risk reward in each of one of them. So I'll pause here and let you know if you have any questions.
Could you try sharing your screen again so we can see what you just explained for us?
Yeah, sure. All right.
Let me try. Let us try again.
Can you see my screen now?
Not yet.
Wait a minute, because I am sharing. Maybe I can just share my entire screen.
I believe on the bottom there's a mute, stop cam, settings, and present, and then you can.
Can you see now my screen?
There you go. Now we have it. So these are the 4 layers you were explaining for us, right?
Yeah, that's the 4 layer, and that's kind of the consensus in the market of to understand kind of the different steps in generative AI. So again, it starts from the infrastructure, from the chip, from kind of the physical stuff. And then there is the extraction of that. Those are the LLM that are built on top of those chips. Then you have the service layer that are focused on one thing, but they can do it in multiple applications. And then you have kind of the application layer, which has the most interface with users. Obviously, LLM has also, because they are now widely spread, but that's kind of the different layers that we see. And what I told you about in terms of from an investment lens, the more you go to in the value chain, the less risk that you're taking, and the less potential reward that you can take out of it. NVIDIA worked, 20 years to manufacture the chip and get to that level. And in 3 years, they become almost a $3 trillion company in terms of market share. So that kind of speaks about the different risk and reward in each level.
And focusing on our crowd strategy, what does our crowd seek in companies to invest? I mean, I believe every AI, our crowd covers all the AI world. But what are the most specific companies that you seek, and why?
Yeah, great question. I'm just going to go to that relevant slide that shows exactly where our companies are. But I think just conceptually, let's take a step back. When you're running a fund, it's not the same consideration of investing directly and do like a deal by deal operation. You need to think about diversity. You need to think about making sure that you have enough capital reserved to double down on the best companies that you invest in, because obviously in day one, when you make the initial investment, you don't really know how it will play out. That's why it's important to keep those reserves for follow-ons. So that's kind of what I say about the difference between investing directly into AI companies, which we did before we formed the fund, and the consideration that goes along investing from a fund vehicle. I do want to say, hold on, I'm gonna just a second. I'm gonna find the the right slide. Hold on. Oh, here it is. Sorry, apologize for the delay. Just a second. So here you kind of see the different investments that we made to date, and it's not a complete picture, but it gives you like a sense. And that slide kind of speaks about the diversification between stage and the different layer. So we at our crowd are a great believer in the infrastructure layer. At the end of the day, everything will be built on those products. So we made a couple of investments there. The large language model, we invested in Anthropic. We had a very, very nice, good opportunities, in our opinion, to invest there. We did like a secondary transaction there and bought stocks at a valuation of $17 billion. Anthropic recently made an up round led by Lightspeed at a valuation of $60 billion. So that's kind of the first markup to our portfolio. And we thought kind of the other LLMs are maybe too expensive. That's why we chose Anthropic over the others. Anthropic, I mean Claude LLM. Anthropic is the company. And in the application layer, obviously there is like an abundance of companies in that layer. We also wanted to be a bit diversified in terms of the sectors, because diversification comes from stage, from the different layers and the sectors. So we're not only just focusing on fintech or healthcare, we're also doing HR tech, enterprise solution, marketing tech. So we're kind of seeing all of that there. And another thing about kind of the strategy, maybe, I think the strategy is about the overarching strategy of our crowd is having the access to the best companies out there. And I think it's not for nothing that we first built this business by investing directly into companies, but then we started investing into funds. And that's just created a lot of access in recent years, because imagine now that we're not only invested in 400 and something companies, we are now an LP in 35 other funds. Those funds are investing in sometimes 20, 30 companies each. So that's kind of just expand you the pool of opportunities. Another thing that is good about in co-investment with the funds that we invested in is about mitigating the risk. You know the partner, you know the GP that you invested in, you can see his memo, his analysis, you can compare analysis of different GPs. So basically, it's kind of an information advantage that we were able to gather through all of those kind of LP position that we have in other funds. And that's kind of what provides us the information advantage and the access to those deals. Apart from that, we also have strategic cooperation, and this fund was done in cooperation with NVIDIA, which we obviously talked about I think it's the leader in AI now and one of the biggest companies in the world. So maybe just about that. So that this fund is in partnership with NVIDIA Inception. NVIDIA Inception basically is a program that designed to help startup evolve faster and embrace kind of the technology of NVIDIA and kind of help build a community around the chips that NVIDIA develops. So that's kind of the idea behind this program. And the benefits, obviously, for the AI fund is that we can get to see a first look on those companies that are participating on that program. I just now got an email from the guy at NVIDIA. They're doing a pitch night in June, and they invited us to present our crowd and to start engage with those startups. And that's one of the most valuable kind of deal flow that you can get. Why is that? Because every AI company out there wants to be in the NVIDIA Inception program. Why is that? Because they can access the NVIDIA chips, basically. And no one can get NVIDIA chips those days. Even the big companies, the Google and the Facebook of the world, need to fight on that supply. So there is a very, very high demand for that chip. Obviously, with those chips, you can start run your AI models and train your AI models and all that. So that's kind of the basic of kind of everything, if you think about it. So that's why this partnership is so strategic for our crowd, and also for companies that outside of the program, we can help them with our relationship with NVIDIA. So it kind of goes vice versa. It doesn't only help the AI fund, it also helps companies that are outside of that program, and we can maybe help them to get inside that program and get access to NVIDIA. So that's kind of that's kind of the overarching strategy of the fund. It's a lot about partnerships. It's a lot about relationship. It's being out there at the ecosystem and being, I don't know, in Israel, we are one of the most active investors for in the past few years. So all of that to basically allows us to access the best companies out there. That's kind of the bottom line mission of everything that we do here.
Great explanation. And given a chance to speak more about our crowd and the companies that you guys invest, how does our crowd engage with its portfolio companies?
Okay, so first of all, because we have just a massive data, because again, we invested in more than 400 companies and 35 funds, so we are constantly tracking on that data. Because, you know, data is the new oil. If you have proprietary data, that's what kind of gives you the unfair advantage and the competitive advantage, because then you can take that LLM and train that data and extract insight of that data. So it's all about, in today's world, it's all about having a proprietary data that just you have and others don't. And that's kind of what we have at our crowd because of our business model that also invest directly in companies, but also invest in funds. Other VCs don't have those characteristics, so that's kind of make their life harder when they are trying to access data and trying to aggregate data. So this is something that we are doing constantly. So I think the first step is to identify that next company that you want, whether it came from the NVIDIA Inception, whether it came from one of your 35 funds that you invested in, And whether it came from your relationship in the Israeli ecosystem and the direct investment that we do. So that's kind of what starts the process. Then obviously there is a long process of due diligence. We would meet with the company, kind of understand what are the products, where they're heading, do a thorough DD on the investors, the market, and kind of everything. We'll mold that into an IC memo. So, and then in the IC memo, the company is coming and presenting to the IC. Then, if it passed IC, then we start doing like a more thorough DD, doing reference calls with their customers, if they have one, and kind of getting greater comfort on those companies. And so that's kind of the process. Sometimes it can take weeks if it's a very high demand kind of company and a high flyer in the market, and sometimes it can take months. It's all about building the conviction and making sure that you feel comfortable with what the company does and kind of the valuation that your entry valuation, I would say. If I would have to name kind of maybe a few companies or a few interesting companies, so maybe I would start with Anthropic, because Anthropic is a very unique kind of investments that we did that speaks about our ability to our great access that we build along the year and our ability to move fast. So Anthropic AI, for those who don't know, they build a large language model just like ChatGPT. It's called Claude, and it's like competes head to head with Gemini of Google and ChatGPT of OpenAI. In something it does better than them, and in others maybe less. But that's kind of the company. And we had a chance to purchase a secondary sale there. Back then, one of their investors went to bankruptcy and had to sell his position. And because we know a lot of kind of people and we have a lot of relationship and network in the private market, we were able to get our hand on that in a $17 billion valuation. So we did it. We made the investment. And I think a month ago, Lightspeed and other top tier VCs in the US led the round at a $60 billion valuation. So it's about having the access. It's about having the expertise to understand what those guys are doing and understand that they are maybe a step ahead of OpenAI and ChatGPT, but they probably will get there soon. So that's kind of the criteria. And obviously we wanted a strong player in the infrastructure layer, because as you probably saw, there aren't many LLMs out there. It's like you have Claude of Anthropic, Gemini of Google, and ChatGPT of OpenAI. So we think those three companies, obviously Google, you can't invest in Gemini, it's a public company, so you're left with OpenAI and Anthropic. OpenAI, it's another company that we invested, but they are far later down the road, and their valuation is more than $200 billion. Then we said, okay, Anthropic, we're just gonna probably follow that trend, and 17 billion looks like a great valuation, a great entry valuation. So that's kind of what we did it from a valuation perspective and from a product perspective. And I'm happy that they are recently completed their app round, and that's basically our first uplift to the portfolio. Another company that I want to highlight, and I talked about that before when we talked about the infrastructure layer, is Zotacore. So as I told you, because those chips are so valuable and they kind of establish a market share on their own, the evolution of sub-markets started to appear. So, okay, you have chip, you need to optimize the workload of that chip. And those chips are getting heated pretty fast because when they work a lot of hours, the temperature goes up. And then if you want to start optimizing those chips and making them work for longer periods, because them working for longer periods means that you can constantly train your AI or putting your application layer on top or whatever you need, then the need to cool those chips started to arise. And we see, and there is like a big market just for that. So Zotacore, what they do a two-phase liquid cooling solution for data center. So basically, they're trying to cool that data center. So there is a really, really big need out there for energy, for data centers, to put those chips. And then there is a greater need to cool those chips so they can work constantly. And that's why we kind of invested in that company. It's in an Israeli company, very, very interesting. Now there is confidential conversation on maybe they will initiate their next round. So yet to be seen there, but a massive increase in their booking. So they didn't have that round yet, but if the sales goes up and the company is generating momentum, the next round will probably come soon. And obviously you can see the names that this company is partnered with: SoftBank, Dell, Supermicro, all of those leading players in this market. And maybe a third company that I want to highlight is Grok, which we're able to access it. It's a very high flyer kind of company with a very high demand. It's a generative AI solution company and they created the LPU inference engine. So basically everyone now is trying to do the fastest language processing accelerator. So your LLM will work much faster, will perform much faster, will cost less. So that's kind of what they're doing, and they offer twice the inference performance, while obviously drastically reducing the infrastructure cost. So there is, those LLM cost a lot of money. It costs a lot of money. I don't know if you saw in the news that if you say to your LLM that you are sorry or please, just that costs OpenAI a lot of money because they need to process those texts that you write to the LLM. So that costs a lot of money. So there is a lot of companies out there that are trying to optimize those large language models, and one of them is Grok, which is doing really, really great since we invested there. I'll pause here and let you know if you have any other questions.
Great. This is a very fun topic, and if we had enough time, we'll be talking for 2-3 hours. But let me ask you something. For our investors considering investing in the AI fund, why is now the ideal time to invest?
So we're seeing a huge embrace of the market for AI tools, something that we didn't saw a few years back. And as I mentioned earlier, what ignited that process is those LLM that just increased the usability of like every home now, right? Uses LLM, can process information, can have a request, can develop a lot of things by his own. So I think that ship has sailed. 2 years ago, people were asking like, AI is real because we had all this glasses from Apple, right? And people said, yeah, everyone in the streets will go with the glasses. And guess what? It didn't happen. And then everybody talked about before that, Facebook wanted to put us in a virtual world. And guess what? It didn't happen. But I think AI is super different on that because it just affects everything. If you think about that, it allows you conceptually to increase productivity. So let's take, for example, Tab9, for example, that company that we invested in that can auto-complete your code and helps developer. So back then, developer write his code will have to spend, 8-10 hours a day to write the code. Now, when you have that Tab9 that auto-complete the code, it can just increase and maximize its productivity. That's basically what it does. So I don't think, by the way, that AI is going to create a massive unemployment and all of those doomsday scenario. I think as often that we saw with technological breakout, I think it's only going to increase productivity, optimize some of the processes that we do now, and with AI will be much easier and faster to do. So it's just another evolution. So if you think about that, before there were iPhones in 26, and you want to trade stock, right? You had to go to your PC, to your computer, be in front of a kind of website, and then ask to sell your stock. I'm not talking about the early days that you have to call to your broker, okay? And then the iPhone came, and all of a sudden, you can do those things in just 1 click and 2 clicks. So that expanded productivity, right? And now AI is going to just accelerate that process, but is accelerating it by changing it from the ground. Like literally everything will change. If you think about it, the verticals that will be the most affected from AI, the first one, will be sectors that has a lot of proprietary data. For example, healthcare, for example. You go to a hospital, and they have a lot of, right, they're doing, part of what they do, doctor, is the diagnosis, right? They will take a photo of your chest and then scan it and try to understand what there is there. So guess what? They're doing it for the past 40 years. Now imagine that you can throw all of those scans into an LLM and make him start identifying those cases. And then the doctor, you don't have to wait like a week or 6 months to the doctor. The doctor uses that software, so it doesn't replace the doctor. It just helps him increase productivity and optimize his processes. So that's what we're seeing now. There is a massive adoption in real life. Like I think 5 years ago, we used to see kind of young companies, and they had to raise their seed in A round, and then they will reach like $1 million of sales, $2 million of sales, and maybe will reach product market fit. Now there is a crazy phenomena that companies using AI and those LLMs and all of that are able to reach and scale much, much faster. So that's kind of what we're seeing in the market. And that's why we think that this is a one in a century kind of opportunity. This is the next technology wave. And that's kind of why we think it's now.
For amazing answers, amazing knowledge you brought to us today. Unfortunately, we have to stop here, but just like I said, if you have enough time, we'll be hours talking about this topic, which is very updated, and just like you said, it's the future, and maybe we can say it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, not only to invest, but to live in this era. So do you have any final statement? You can bring some light to our investors.
Look, I think now is there is no better time to invest in AI companies. We see just massive adoption in the market. I don't think it's this, we talked about the glasses of,
right?
Yeah, the glasses of Apple. And I think like also in the industry, I think 2 or 3 years ago, people were kind of questioning, is this the new buzz? Now, like I must tell you, that discussion is over. People understand that it's here, and now they need to understand who are they betting and if they are choosing the right horse. So that's kind of where we are now. I think that it doesn't need to be proved again that AI is here, that people are starting to use it. We're seeing it. The NVIDIA stock is just a reflection. If you think about conceptually, it's just a reflection of that. Because all of a sudden, all of the world are starting using their chip because you can train AI models, and that company becomes a $3 trillion market share company. So I don't think you need more evidence than that, but you need to have proprietary data, and you need to have access. Those are the two elements that will allow you to choose the best companies out there. And that's what we think we have at our crowd, and we built in the past 12 years.
Great. Or thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and a big thanks to our Hearst investors to joining. Let me switch here to.
Thank you for hosting me, and if you want to do it again, I'm more than happy to do so.
Thank you so much, Or.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Pessoal, obrigado por participarem dessa live. A gente teve a oportunidade de falar exclusivamente com o head de fundos da Our Crowd. Essa oportunidade está disponível na nossa plataforma. Como resumo, o OR mostra todas as evidências de que investimento em inteligência artificial não é mais um buzz no mercado, é algo de extrema relevância, de mudança na sociedade. Então, convido vocês, mais uma vez, a entrarem na nossa plataforma, terem uma olhada nessa oportunidade de parceria com a Our Crowd sobre investimentos em inteligência artificial. Obrigado.